at least. Hopefully some others will chime in. I know there is a Resilience VA conference this morning that several working group members are participating in, so they're going to circle back later. But for now, I'll go ahead and get started. So
I was just going to say, I'm glad to hear it's going to end a little. I might have to jump off. I've got a daughter that I have to take over to field hockey practice or something around 10:30. I get my marching orders on the fly.
Okay, very good. Well, we will move along. So hopefully I'm showing the first slide, and David put the link to the slide deck in the chat, or he will. And then on that slide deck are all of the links that you can access during this if you need them. If you have any questions or want to leave any thing for us, you can put it on slide 2. Today is part 3. It's the last meeting of the summer. After this, we'll be working on plan development. So I'm going to walk you through this last piece and get some feedback on the outcomes and indicators, some feedback on the accountability structure, and then we'll wrap up. So the objectives today are to define the indicators to measure the progress toward the outcomes, and I'll go through that a little bit so you understand how we're defining each of those elements. And then we're going to brainstorm the accountability structure for equitable implementation. Good morning, Jeannie. We're glad you could make it. So don't need to go through the ground rules. You're familiar with those. The planning process, again, we're at the end of plan development. This is the last meeting. And so what's coming up next is that we're going to wrap up our work with you. Over the next several months, we'll be drafting the plan, and then we'll pull together all of that amazing content that you guys have helped us generate up until now. And then we'll put a draft plan out to the community with the goal of finalizing and seeking approval next year. So you can see here kind of what's coming up. Most of it's internal, and then community engagement, and then advocacy for plan adoption next summer and fall. So again, you're very familiar with this draft structure. We're down at the bottom where the meat of it is for the working groups. And you've seen this before, but just want to remind you how the work you did over the summer led to the final pieces that we'll talk about today, those outputs and outcomes. We took all of those impact maps and came up with 12 overarching outcomes that we'll share with you. And then the impacts specifically, are showing how we're going to ensure accountability and transparency, and want to ask you for some thoughts on what that means to you. So again, these are all the elements that we've worked on this summer. We're going to talk about indicators now. With the plan itself being the big picture, we want to make sure that we're getting to those outcomes that the community wants to see through RVAgreen 2050. So an outcome, what we're defining that as, is an aspect of the future Richmond the community wants to see. We heard these from you. We heard them through all of our listening sessions. We heard that through our community engagement period. And so what we did is we started with the outcomes that the community wanted to see, and then we summarized them to get to a workable number that was overarching enough that it touched everything, all 5 pathways and all the strategies. And so then we ended up with these 12 draft outcomes that we're going to show you. But I want to go through these other definitions first. So for each outcome, we are identifying indicators, and those are the data points that'll demonstrate progress toward an outcome. So for each outcome, we'll have at least one indicator that's how we measure success toward that outcome. And then the next one, so as we were brainstorming these indicators, first we're starting with, okay, say for air quality, it's the city wants to see better air quality. Well, how do you measure air quality? Well, the air quality index, or the number of hot days each year. But once we saw, okay, there's a very traditional way of measuring better air, but how can we center equity in that indicator? So we were kind of looking at, do we want to make all of them just equity indicators? Well, no, we do need to measure overall traditional data points, but then let's assign an additional several equity indicators if we can. So those are the data points that demonstrate equitable progress toward an outcome. And so an example of that would be, here's one for cleaner and more efficient buildings. That's one of the outcomes. So the traditional indicator would be total citywide building energy use, or a reduction in, we're going to measure that overall reduction in citywide building energy use. So how can we think about equity in that? Well, something that we're measuring is what's called an energy burden, and that is the percentage of your income that you're spending on utilities. And we have those numbers, and we have them by census block. And so maybe we can disaggregate that even further by race, or we have the income, but looking a little deeper and reporting on an equity indicator would help us to make sure that we are centering equity in the outcomes. So those are the definitions. Any questions on that at this point?
So yeah, so in other words, we would have like is that how we would categorize? I guess we'll see this, but it'll be like a more typical environmental indicator, and then it's like an equity check kind of thing. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And hoping that knowing that all of our strategies, all those next steps that we developed to the last couple of meetings, we had our next steps. Okay, if we want to see this strategy, what are the next steps? Well, it's, get an ordinance and measure this and do that. Okay, well, what's the equity gap that could be addressed? And then we talked about that. And then we thought, well, how can we prioritize equity in the first next steps? Okay, so we've done that with the next step piece. How are we also doing that when we're measuring the success of the strategies? We'll have.
And so Dawn, so like, I'm sorry, I missed the last meeting, but so these, in other words, at this step, you all as a staff have come up with these indicators.
We've come up with some draft indicators that we're going to check with you through the activities. Right. So let me show you what those are. The 12 outcomes are cleaner and more efficient buildings, engaged and involved community, improved air quality, advanced green economy, increased support for climate action and resilience, more green space and trees, lower greenhouse gas emissions, increased heat resilience, increased flood resilience, climate-ready community, less landfill waste, and cleaner and more efficient transportation. And so what we saw, those are the things that will be achieved by implementing the entire plan as a whole. And so we did a check, and we went back through all of the pathways and all of the objectives and all of your impact mapping to see what those impacts were and how they rolled back up. And after a lot of time, kind of getting as high as we could, floating it all up, we came up with these 12 outcomes. They're all mitigation, resilience, and equity from the equity tool. So you can see here, these X's represent whether or not that objective could be measured, could have an indicator that could help to measure these outcomes or get to these outcomes. And so across the whole plan, not every single objective relates to it relates, but it might not be showcasing every single outcome. Across the whole plan, we're pretty covered. So that's what it looks like across the entire plan. For the waste pathway, the ones that really jumped out were engaged and involved community. I think you guys get it, by improving how we are getting rid of our waste is going to create and require a very engaged and involved community. And then improved air quality, of course. Advanced green economy. We talk a lot about manufacturing, industry, consumer behaviors, business practices. I think there's a lot of opportunity here for advanced green economy. And then increased support for climate action and resilience. lower greenhouse gas emissions, climate ready community, that has a lot to do with resilience, and then less landfill waste, obviously. So those are the highlighted ones that we're going to be focusing on in the breakout activity. And so the 3 questions we're going to be asking you are, 1, are these the right indicators and equity indicators for those outcomes? And I'll show you those in a minute. Where can we find the data for the indicators? If it doesn't exist, how could we get it? Which indicators can be disaggregated by race, income, and other factors? So I'll just show you what they look like. For engaged and involved community, the traditional indicator is total participation in climate action. Actually, you know what? Pause. I'm going to jump to the one that's most relevant to this group. So less landfill waste. As we're talking about indicators, and I would really love your feedback because I think we could probably do better. But the indicators will be annual tonnage of waste going to the landfill and percentage of waste being diverted from the landfill to be recycled or composted. Those would be traditional indicators for less landfill waste. Maybe we even want to change this outcome to zero waste. I don't know. When you're talking to the community about the waste pathway, what do you think the outcome should be? So I want you to help us kind of define these 3 elements. So the outcome is less landfill waste. The indicator are these 2. And then to think about equity, is there a way that we could look at the percentage of waste being diverted from landfill by neighborhood? Could we think about waste audits or illegal dump sites and where they're located throughout the city? Or, what are the indicators that could help us measure progress toward zero waste or less waste going to landfill? So we're going to go split up into 2 groups, and we'll have 45 minutes longer if needed. I really want to get your thoughts on this to go through the 8 of them. So, or 7, sorry. So we'll have David and Wendy on slide 23. And let's see, or maybe since we have a small group, maybe we should try to do them together. What do y'all think? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Maybe we'll split into 2 and then come back together. And if we have additional thoughts, we can go there. So we'll take a break, a couple minutes, and then at 9:20, I'm going to send half of you with Wendy and David, and the other half will stay with me. And we'll go through these, but I want you to be thinking about those 3 questions at the bottom. Are these, first of all, does this outcome make sense to you? Are these the right indicators and equity indicators for that outcome? Where can we find the data for the indicators? If it doesn't exist, do you know how we could get it? Do you have any thoughts? Because of course, we have 12 outcomes across an entire plan. That's a lot to measure, especially if this is like on an annual basis. So that's why there are lots of details. We could get in the weeds and measure a lot of things. We could quarterly waste audits and percentage of set out rates and all kinds of stuff, but that's just not sustainable. We need to kind of think as overarching as we can. What can we actually measure? And if that data already exists somewhere, that's even better, because we do want to be successful. So, and then the third question is, which indicators can be disaggregated by race, income, and other factors? So I'm going to take a minute to split you up, and if you have any questions, please ask. All right, I'm going to, if you want to come back early, just click on the leave or return to main room in the top right corner. Otherwise, I'll see you back here at 10 o'clock. It's so weird. I had trouble with this yesterday. There we go. All right, I'm going to start now. All right, so you guys will work on the first 3 and then just come back to join the rest of us when you're done with that. Okay, so I've got Tom and Katrina and Jeannie. So that's a powerhouse here. Let's start with increased support for climate action and resilience. So the indicator to measure that would be percentage of our strategies with funding from any source, from the city, from private sector, really make sure that we have support. Then the equity indicator would be money available for neighborhood-based climate action and resilience projects. I'm not sure that those are the best at all. It's just kind of where we landed. Someone said, for it's hard to, it sounds easy to just ask for money. Yeah, this is a mayoral priority, so put it in the budget and you'll get it. But there are a lot of priorities. So sometimes we can measure things like maybe it's the number of staff hours that are being allocated as a resource, or the number of volunteers, or I don't know. How do you guys think we could, let's start with the indicators.
I was just going to say, I mean, my brain wants to know what, to review the strategies, but yet at a certain level, all the strategies are so intertwined.
Yep.
So this is really just kind of more of a, a more higher general level statement. So without getting bogged down on it, I mean, if you look at it that level, I think the indicators and the equity indicator statements are, I think they're fine. It's really just, okay, is there increased support? Well, have these initiatives been funded? Yes or no? And yes, are they across a broad spectrum of neighborhoods and communities? Now, implementing each strategy to that effect is the harder part.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Katrina or Jeannie?
The only thing I'm thinking is whether or not we could get some kind of feedback or yearly response from projects. At least we can track like that. You know what I'm saying? Could we require any of the projects or organizations to report annually on the success of their strategies or what they did with the funding, so that we can kind of track it like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's a great suggestion.
But again, I completely agree with you, Katrina, there. But I wonder if, again, to me, this is kind of a general statement. And would we be doing that at the level of the other outcomes? Or maybe not, Don.
Would be doing what?
We would be evaluating the success of each strategy.
Yep. So that goes into the accountability. This is kind of feeding into the next part of the activity of accountability.
Right.
And maybe assigning performance evaluations with, the employees who are responsible for, successfully implementing the strategies. So I think it feeds in.
Well, let's get, back to the way it's worded here. Increased support. How do we define support? Is that is that financial support, that seems to be what this is getting at. Is it support from the community? Is it support from the mayor's office? I mean, and I guess that's what you're getting through financial support. So if it's just support, I think you've got that. I think that the wording here works out just fine. Like Katrina said, yeah, sure, you're going to want to annually see how you're doing towards 2050. I mean, what's our percentage of projects and strategies that have been funded? What's our percentage of strategies and projects that have been completed? That would not necessarily be, maybe that is in this area too, because then that's complete funding and support of the strategy.
Yep. I agree with you, and I appreciate you summarizing that. But one of the reasons that I struggle with this one is that when you ask the community, this question, they say, well, is the government putting money towards it? And as a staff person, there's a lot more that goes into it than just the money, because the money is very limited. So are there other things that we could measure that would indicate support? Citizens want to see money. They say, well, if your office doesn't have any budget, so obviously you're not important. Well, we like to think that even though we don't have much budget, the fact that we're pulled into, we're asked to attend other projects and lead other projects and draft ordinances and things like that. So is there another way to measure the city's support for climate action resilience? And if not, that's fine. We can keep it as this, but we're just wondering if you can think of any other creative ways to measure support.
Well, I mean, I agree with what you're saying there too, because support, like, okay, yeah, let's see if the city's putting money to it. But as a citizen, you also cringe when money gets thrown at things and nothing happens.
That's right.
Or something that, you see that they're, it's like when they're repaving a road that didn't have any potholes in it. You're like, okay, what's going on here? Why are we just spending money needlessly when there's so many other needs? So, I mean, are you thinking maybe as you're thinking this through, you're thinking in terms of community surveys on gauging the level of support for climate action projects? I think that would be kind of an interesting concept to throw in there, because I think that, like, if you were to talk about climate change and greenhouse gases 10 years ago, probably 90% of the folks out there would just kind of glaze over and not really know what you're talking about. Whereas today, some point, certainly the people are all over the place with their opinions there, but just in the last 5 years, I think you've seen a huge pendulum swing with just everyday people understanding that, wow, something's got to be done. So again, I think the engagement, I think the projects, I think the publicity of projects and, the 2050 initiative, I think you're going to see more and more awareness. So, and again, I think this could be something that would help cover some of these other objectives as well, but to survey the community on their support of climate action and resilience projects. I think that if anything, as we sit here and do this now, it's progressive and insightful, but at some levels, the general public isn't getting it. We've talked about that in various aspects, but you're going to see it get bigger and bigger. You're going to see, so these things, as they start to get energy and are moving forward, and if it gets even damn hotter during these summers, and we keep on flooding our basements and hear about more and more about things in the news, I think the level of support will increase too.
Yeah.
I think also we need some kind of tool, just like you use, in terms of prioritizing project impact and equity.
Right.
So so that when it's time to get funding or ask for funding, we can present to say, here are our percentage of neighborhood projects that need funding, so that we're equitable. And here are the ones that have the most impact that need the money and that kind of thing. So I think we need the same kind of tool that we've been using throughout this process to say, so that when we are asking for, the city's gonna, give money to things that are more visual for them or have more impact to constituents, that kind of thing.
Right.
Corporations are going to give money, based on their priorities or what fits in with their mission statement. So I think we should definitely focus on finding a tool to be able to present across the board to say, here are the projects and actions that we want to take, and we need funding here, 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 and here.
Right.
like
And they should be prioritized according to community need.
Mm-hmm.
That's great, Katrina. I was thinking along the same lines and I couldn't articulate it. So thank you for doing that for me.
Well, and
I was also thinking about, Dawn, you brought up the question. So what is, we talked about, what does support mean? Does that mean funding? Does that mean increased community participation? And perhaps one of the indicators could be, how many neighborhood groups or how many stakeholder groups in the affected neighborhoods have been pulled into the project, or whatever, how many how many community members are actually being asked to engage or are engaging with this particular goal.
And you do have private funding sources as a potential piece there. And it makes me think of, like, if you have the projects, if you have the list of projects that are in the communities, in the neighborhoods and things, and if it gets down to some of them, being, something tangible, like, in, a community garden, or just installing, recycling bins and things in the parks, or, maybe providing for composting of food waste or something, these types of things that could be funded by corporations if you put it out there. And, it's just, it's that concept of, hey, I get my name on something, on a sign. And I think that would be, one of those things that could be like, and that's why I love that idea of putting all the projects that we want to achieve down to the level of communities out there. Because then it really does speak to, like you said, Katrina, the planning ahead to say, okay, these communities need it more than these.
Yeah, great idea. And I want to check in with Dawn Williamson, because she was having trouble with her audio, and she chatted me, but I can't chat back. So Dawn, I can't hear you, and I'm sorry I can't respond in the chat. But we can, if you can't figure out your audio, we can always circle back later one-on-one and you can give us your input. I don't know. I guess keep messing with it and just speak up. Anything else on this one, or do you want to jump to the next one? This is all great. Thank you for this. And Katrina, I'm going to put your name next to this because that was a good idea, and I'm going to ask you more about that. All right, so then lower greenhouse gas emissions. The indicator would be community-wide greenhouse gas emissions and city government greenhouse gas emissions. Pretty straightforward. And then the equity indicator would be greenhouse gas emissions per capita, disaggregated by neighborhood, race, and income. When you're thinking about carbon footprint, I guess if we want to think about waste specifically here, can you think of any indicators or equity indicators that would help us kind of measure the success toward and communicate the importance of lowering greenhouse gas emissions in an equitable way?
Well, I was going to say that I've even actually done some waste and energy assessments down in Greenville, of all places, but did it for their, their housing projects essentially, and it was very interesting exercise, and it was actually, they were making a lot of great progress there, doing their energy audits and things, and the community was great to work with. And we implemented, put out recycling containers for everybody, which this was a project we did 9 or 10 years ago, and it was very eye-opening, and everybody was, the folks we worked with were very amenable to using the containers correctly, et cetera. I think that's one of the things that as the entire community struggles with is, use of recycling containers correctly. And understanding why it's important. So I think that you could very easily work with TFC in this case. And of course, then there's still the issue of the fact that recycling is not even available for various areas relative to, whether it's an apartment building or whatever. So that's another area we could address. But I think you could work with TFC, at least as the provider for Richmond, and understand which communities are, per capita are generating lots of recycling, and they will know too where, they poignantly know when, a restaurant or somebody that is really messing up and, not using the containers correctly, but they would probably know generally too which communities are having a harder time with it, and so that could at least help you direct, what type of outreach and engagement you would want to have in those areas.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be important, just like we did in the previous strategy, to define our greenhouse gas emissions that have the most impact, So then we can say, hey, can we put all, if there's more ridership on buses in XYZ neighborhoods, then is that where we can put our clean buses? You know what I'm saying? So I think we have to kind of say, what are the emissions that are, have the biggest impact, I guess, and then wrap some of our stuff around that, whether, and that's community-wide and also government, like what government buildings or what government projects or whatever have the greatest emissions and need the biggest concentration. Does that make sense?
well, my question, I completely agree with you there that, yeah, that's what we need to do for this entire initiative, but aren't we just focusing on waste for this factor?
Actually, I'm appreciating all levels of this conversation, right, because at the end of the day, it is all going to roll up.
Oh, okay.
And we're looking for a specific indicator. And so we're going to be measuring this already. We're going to be measuring community-wide greenhouse gas emissions, city government, we're doing this already, city government greenhouse gas emissions. Mm-hmm. And then we can easily look at greenhouse gas emissions per capita and just aggregate that by neighborhood or race or income.
Okay.
But when we actually think about these things that you're talking about, it helps me just kind of roll it up a little better, okay, in terms of like how I'm going to do that.
All right.
But yeah, because the waste piece of greenhouse gas emissions is, lower on the
trash and the recycling, right?
For sure.
Right.
And that's why I even kind of struggle with it a little bit. It's kind of like, how do we really define that? So
right. Okay.
So to me, I was just trying to pinpoint the number of, well, really just it's less landfill waste. Really is what that's what that goal is. And then if there's less landfill waste, then there's less greenhouse gas.
Right.
But I think that's why I liked what Katrina was saying, because I still like, I feel like my heart is in the waste category, even though it's only 3% of our emissions, because that's where every single citizen can participate and they can see it and they have a contribution to make and they're consuming and they're throwing away. And it's
right.
like, no matter how much money you make, I mean, there is a spectrum, of course, but like every single human being generates waste. And so I think that that's like it's like the entry drug or something, right? And then the way you said, like, you know, wrapping or concentrating the projects around where we are seeing the biggest impacts. I think that's a good, I like the way you're framing this. It's helping me think about like next steps. So, all right. So then the next one is climate ready community. What did that mean? That, you know, resilience basically. So the number and reach of services and initiatives integrating information on climate change impacts and readiness. So as we were saying back in the beginning, you know, the community, while it's getting better, for the most part, they don't really understand. They know it's hotter and they know that there are puddles or, you know, they see the impacts. And so the conversation's getting easier. How do we, as, you know, the ones in this field, take advantage of that and, you know, go at it, make sure that the community really is climate ready. So do we measure the number? I don't even know what that means. The number and reach of services and initiatives integrating information on climate change impacts and readiness. How do we measure that? If you think about our recycling program, do we look at the information going out to citizens? Do we look at marketing? Do we look at contracts?
You know, again, that's got like relating back to the last piece, you know, my brain is, you know, went at the higher level as well, because I'm still trying to kind of like decipher what that means, the number and reach of services, et cetera. I mean,
yeah.
First thing I went to from a tangible basis is like, you know, the fact that what makes me think about, you know, 20 years ago, probably 50% of the houses in the city didn't have air conditioning. You know, I mean, everybody had fans and stuff. So, you know, we've already seen that type of increase, but there's still that, now there's an increasing need there too. So there's a real functional thing that, like, you know, we need to be worrying about everybody, because when it's 110 degrees, you know, fans don't work anymore. But down to the level of trash and recycling, it's even tougher. I mean, I think a little bit about like, you know, as storms and things get more bigger and violent or whatever, you know, you always see cans blown over and things like that. I mean, I don't know, just struggling with how that really works. I know, like, sometimes if you go to the beach and there's a great big storm that comes through and it knocks the cans over everywhere. It's, you know, there's a tangible issue there, but I don't know exactly what it would boil down to here for us.
Yeah, I see.
I mean, I think once we talked about previously, we talked about how the trucks, you know, when it's hot or whatever, are going to burn more gas and whatever. I think that was brought up in one of the meetings before.
Yeah, let me see if I can show you the impact map for waste. So this is the one for climate ready community. Sorry, let me see where this falls. Climate ready community, that has a lot to do with the climate related illnesses and fatalities. So community health and well-being. So all of the waste strategies that had to do with community health and well-being were things like new construction and disposal standards and how those materials need to, you know, there's less raw materials for mining, potential for illegal dumping. So how do we make sure our community is staying healthy? This one was incentivize waste reduction in manufacturing processes, new legislation, a lot of industrial stuff. That's objective 4. So every one of our strategies somehow, residential composting program leads to community health and well-being, less food waste in landfills, more jobs, less disruptions, more community gardens, improved topsoil. I don't know if this helps. That's how we kind of came at it, this idea of
well, I mean, I see where that, as that breaks down there, it's like, it's not just the, less landfill waste, like the bottom one. It is, for the climate change piece, it's what types of things did you do? If you're, if you've redirected towards composting of food waste and compostables, and there's a percentage there to measure, well, there's a different factor for greenhouse gas emission reduction.
Mm-hmm.
Dawn, I'm wondering why we're not thinking about measuring the health outcomes of certain communities. How many.
I'm glad you asked, because that's where we started, like measure the number of climate related fatalities and illnesses, heart disease or heat related. But we wanted to be careful about being responsible for community health. While that's going to be an outcome, is better health, we want to make sure we're measuring the things that we have control over. So if we have control over the number of services that we're, like the work that we can do, that's what we want to be measuring. We don't really have control over people's health,
No, we don't. Although we do know that, heat deserts or heat contribute to higher incidences of COPD and asthma and things like that. So, and that tends to concentrate in neighborhoods of color. So, so I feel like somehow those measurements need to be taken into account, even though we can't we can't control how people eat. We can't control people's genes, but we do know that there are climate issues that contribute to, poor health. So I don't know.
So can we measure people who take advantage of programs? Like, can we say last year there were 200 participants in the city's cool centers, and this year there were 400? Like, could we measure those things? Or like XYZ Church gives away fans for people who don't have them. And so last year they gave away, 3,000 fans, but this year they're giving away 6,000 fans, so can we do more of a service-based measurement based on impacts like that? Could we look at maybe the Red Cross or the Salvation Army that takes in people who are displaced by flooding or by fires or by heat related kind of, climate related kind of displacements? Can we more so measure those types of numbers?
That's
rather
a great
than,
suggestion.
XYZ number of people in these communities are hot. Well, yeah, but how many more this year had to stay in a hotel or, move out of their space because it, was impacted?
Right. How many people are going to the Vernon Johns Center because they need services related to
heat or related to flooding, the things that have the big impacts in terms of climate change.
Exactly.
Tom, did you have a thought? It looked like you were trying.
Well, no, I was just agreeing. Like, we tend to sort of brush being in Richmond. We sometimes, brush flooding aside a little bit. That we don't have coastal flooding, that we still have flash flooding issues. And, I mentioned basements themselves, even. I mean, as that increases, that sometimes can just, that creates a financial need for folks. I mean, especially in different communities, elderly folks who have a flooded basement. Are you kidding? I mean, I was over at my mom's, she actually doesn't live in Richmond, but, days, where she had a backed up situation there. And I mean, if you don't have those resources, then, you know, what do you do? It sits there and festers, and it's awful. So,
well, then it becomes a massive health issue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that I like what you're saying, and I think that kind of gets at this number and reach of services and initiatives integrating information. So as they pass out fans, let them know why, or, you know, include that conversation, that engagement. And Dawn said she thinks the participation of the community will be the measure. And so tying it all together and explaining that this is what this is.
Right.
Is great. All right. Well, then this last one, let's spend some time on this final outcome. Less landfill waste. Is that the right outcome? Or what does the community want to see regarding waste?
Yeah, less landfill waste, definitely. And the second part of that, which is percentage of waste diverted from landfill to be recycled or composted, is an important part of that. Like, you know, it's all right to have less waste, but are we creating a cycle to say, you know, some of the stuff can be repurposed or reused, or, you know, that kind of thing. And so I think we can measure by, of course, can we measure by less tonnage? I mean, we could get information from the city related to, you know, numbers of tonnage that are received. And then we can also measure new community gardens, new requests for, you know, we keep people's requests for composting bins. So those are things we can measure.
Well, yeah, so I know we can get the city tonnage for landfill waste. We would actually have to work with TFC and other haulers for recycling a little bit more, because that's a function of all the commercial contracts as well. In addition, TFC trucks don't know boundaries. They don't measure, they don't stop at the Richmond city boundary. So we would have to develop a way within that partnership for them to give us good numbers. I would gather we've done a little bit of that at the city level already. Composting wise, you know, there are various composting organizations, kind of like the NOPE is the #1 hauler type deal. But so those numbers are readily available, but you do have other folks that are doing things through the community gardens and, you know, RVA compost and that sort of thing. So all those things are going to be very measurable along those lines. Again, I think we were talking a little bit, you know, each of these things has a little bit different effect on greenhouse gas emissions for us to consider.
Yeah, I think of this one as less about greenhouse gas emissions, since we're capturing that in the modeling for that outcome. But less landfill waste is the stuff, which has so many more implications. And yeah, the numbers, I'm telling you, that is really hard. We have numbers for, of course, municipal and what's collected at the convenience centers. But like he said, those haulers, I mean, having them give us their information, that's proprietary, and they have a business model. And then 2, they don't, you know, separate by where it's coming from. It's just like whatever route is going to be the cheapest. So
yeah.
But they actually, I mean, they're used to having to report to different entities. I mean, because if you're servicing a business, you know, or a larger business these days, they have a sustainability plan. They have to be able to provide those types of numbers. So
some of them,
in the same way, and they're not exact. Okay, so but they are exact every time you take a 20-yard haul over into the landfill or even to the facility itself. So if you're doing larger scale stuff, they can come up with the numbers, is the point.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
Wait, let me ask who you mean by they.
The haulers. I mean, it takes some doing. I mean, you know, down to the level of, like, you know, when I used to run Folk Festival or whatever, have to fight and scream with city staff just to get them to, like, not run the trucks around except for that one night, servicing that one event. But yeah, you can make it happen if you sit down in a room and get reasonable about it.
Are they not required to provide data to the city? Are the recycling people not already required to
The recycling contract through TFC, they do. But the trash is, so yeah, the percentage waste diverted from the landfill by neighborhood for recycling is easier to track than the actual trash that's being removed out of Richmond.
It is?
Oh yeah, the trash. You're saying municipal government. We can track municipal, which is just residential and government buildings.
Yeah.
Right. But the actual trash by all the other waste haulage for everybody's house and everybody's business.
Yeah.
Right.
That.
Right.
We can't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but
not the houses. I mean, the city does the houses.
Well,
that's
multifamily, not multifamily. So
no, not multifamily.
Yeah, they have to have a private
yeah, there's just a
contractor
lot of gray area on this one.
And apartment buildings, etc.
Right.
But I mean, if you're Fairfax County, all required.
Yep, it's in there.
Per building, per business, required to fill out an annual report.
I know.
Is that something that we should
That's
ask for?
Well,
that would be
because we've already talked a lot about creating the ordinance or whatever it is, the policy change that all apartment buildings have to recycle, even though you're a business, whatever. But we don't even have that for across the board for all businesses like they do in Northern Virginia counties.
Yeah, there's just a lot more wealth up there and people who will do it. If in Richmond, if we tell people you have to start doing this and that, then just leave. So, all right. Any other measurements of waste? So for the equity indicator, the percent of waste being diverted from landfill by neighborhood, we can get those recycling setup rates and we can improve our practices, hopefully do multifamily, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, is that really what we want to measure? Or what about illegal dump sites by neighborhood? Because if they have to, if we're making it harder for them to get rid of their trash and if there are any potential dollars associated, then they'll just dump it.
Yes, they will. Yeah. And my neighborhood, because we cleaned up a dump site and it took, I think, 3 times before that Richmond Henrico Turnpike Canyon was cleaned out. I can't remember how many tons, 3 tons of tires alone. It was crazy. So yeah, we should be measuring that, how many illegal dump sites are being cleaned up.
And can we coordinate with police departments? Do people report that through the police department a lot of times, or?
And what are the penalties?
Penalties are really hard because you can't prove many times who did it. I mean, we got very lucky when we were cleaning up the Cannon Creek Greenway on Richmond Henrico Turnpike, and Imperial Plaza actually had stenciled tons of old equipment that they dumped. So it was easy to find that Imperial Plaza did it. But then did Imperial Plaza do it, or did the company that they hired to haul away do it? And Imperial Plaza had no idea that it had been thrown there 10 years ago. That becomes a very sticky situation.
Right.
We were just talking about this actually last night. This very thing last night in the Clean City Commission meeting that we had. We were talking about folks who needed to be fined for illegal dumping around their businesses, but it's not always the business that does it. If somebody comes and throws as we said, a half a block's worth of trash around somebody's dumpster, it's not fair to find that business because they didn't do it. So that's a very hard thing to.
Right. Okay, so on that note, everyone's coming back with us, which is great. We're just finishing up the less landfill waste and trying to think if those are the right indicators, the tonnage of waste going to the landfill. The equity indicator could be the waste being diverted, basically recycling rates by neighborhood. A lot goes into that. If we measure the number of illegal dump sites by neighborhoods and the number of times cleaned up, of course, we're always, you know, it's chasing the problem, right? How do we prevent the problem? How do we measure the success of the prevention of the problem in the first place? So I think that could be an indicator, how many times we're still cleaning up. And if that number goes down, then we must be doing something right on the strategy side. So I think that might be a good one. Can you think of anything else?
Well, I would think just the percentage, again, we were talking about, communities that don't have recycling available. So, you're looking at percentage of your population that doesn't have recycling services available. And again, it gets back to these apartment buildings and things like that. But then it's the businesses themselves. If we could measure that, yeah, we're, you were saying before, we're not Fairfax County where we're have the clout or whatever at this time to require that all businesses recycle, and we don't have an ordinance now that says all the apartment buildings have to provide for it, but that doesn't mean we can't. We shouldn't.
Great. Okay, and then poor Dawn has not had audio, but I see a couple of comments. Let me make sure I've captured them. She says participation in the community will be the measure. More engagement from citizens will be a success. I think that was in relation to the increased support for climate action and resilience. Being asked to participate and engaging, I'll add. Okay, and then the second note she has is repair events can help with keeping items out of the landfill, which would help with frustration levels of citizens, plus there's an economic benefit. There could be a count of items repaired, usually held at community centers of churches. Yeah, so those are kind of getting down into the specifics of how to get at less landfill waste. So I'll add that language to the equitable implementation steps.
Well, I think the one concept that is missing from the less landfill piece is the waste reduction and reuse concept. And that gets at that.
I'll just put that here for now. Thank you, Dawn. Any other thoughts before we move on? How did your group do, Wendy and David?
Good.
Well,
we made it through, so.
yes. Build the page, right? That's our indicator.
Thank you. Okay, so we can take a break after I kind of explain what is next. We're going to go through the accountability and transparency. This is a very general conversation, asking you, what does accountability mean to you? What does government transparency mean to you? I laugh when I hear that, because as a government worker, when people say government's not transparent, a lot of times internally, not me, but kind of like all governments think that means just, well, put more data out there, give them more information, but it's just like bombardment, right? Information overload. What does it actually mean? So that's the kind of the gap between this, lack of transparency. I don't think anyone's trying to be, trying to foil anybody. It's just, what does transparency mean to us for this plan? And what does accountability mean to us for this plan? So we're going to go through the two questions of what does accountability mean to you, and then how would you ensure equity is centered? We've talked about that a lot, but how are we accountable to ensuring equity? So breaking that down a little more, on the first question, who's being held accountable? Is it city staff? Is it citizens? Is it politicians? Is it all of the above? How do we set up some kind of framework to ensure that? And then how is progress reported and communicated? Like I was saying, we can throw all the numbers out there, but it's not going to mean anything unless we put some context to it. So how do we do that? Obviously, communication is super important. How can we increase and streamline interdepartmental communication and collaboration? Katrina had a great idea talking about a tool. that really helps to align priorities and explain, because so much of this, as we've talked about, co-alignment and intersectionality, we need to streamline that communication and collaboration. And then who owns the plan? I love thinking this as a community-owned plan. I'm going to do everything I possibly can in my one little person to create some kind of like a toolkit, but I need to hand that to somebody, and I will continue to, do everything in my power to ensure success. But who's going to own the plan, and what does that actually mean? And then when we get to the second question, it's how would you ensure equity is centered? So should there be a new standalone group to guide implementation, and what is that role? So an example is right now, Jeannie's on the Racial Equity and Environmental Justice Roundtable, and they have done a fabulous job of keeping us in check the whole time, making sure that we're talking about the neighborhoods that we want to focus on and the language that we want to use, and how are we centering equity every step of the way? Does that continue on in some form, and if so, what does that look like? Are there existing tools that we could use? We know about the Climate Equity Index, and we know about the equity screening tool that all of the working groups help to create, but maybe there's another tool that you know of out there. So one example that we came up with is maybe each strategy has, this implementation team that we're kind of dreaming up is required to use the equity screening tool, and the Office of Sustainability tracks the use of that tool. I don't know, just throwing that out as an example. And then the third one is, how do we delegate power? That empowerment. How do we get beyond our known circles? Because everyone who's involved with this now is already strapped. We need to expand that. This touches every human being. So how do we get beyond the known circles and, kind of get more ownership and accountability out there for the success of this plan? So those are the two brainstorm questions. We're going to go into breakout rooms, and what that looks like is we have sticky notes, and there are, let's see, so there are two of each. So you guys, if you have access to the slide deck, you can type on the sticky notes yourself, or your facilitator can type for you, drag stars down to comments that you like, but we're just going to brainstorm these two concepts. I am going to send us back into those breakout rooms. I know Tom needs to leave in like 20 minutes. So what I'll do is we're going to just do the same groups. I tried to mix it up yesterday in a meeting and it didn't work. So we're going to stick with what we have, but feel free to come back when you guys want to join the main room, and we can finish this conversation. So any questions on that? Okay, so I'm gonna, yes, this whole Teams thing is so silly. I think because you came back, I have to close it and then reopen. Yep, I have to close. And
I'm wondering if we can just rejoin the room. Like mine still has the option to join the room.
Can you all just rejoin? That might prevent what happened yesterday from happening again. Okay. Yep, Jason went.
Okay.
All right. We'll see you guys back when you get through that. Okay.
That was easy. That was simple.
That was so much better yesterday, because you had to Teams is just slow already. David, were you able to do it?
It said I didn't have permission anymore, so it brought me back here.
Oh, that's weird. Okay, let me see if I can assign David.
And I see Ella's still here, and she was in our group too.
Okay. Oh, I came back.
Me?
Jason
It
and
didn't work.
Lindsay.
When I clicked to join it, it said the link had expired and it booted me out of everything.
Okay.
Yeah, same.
Do you guys just want to stay in the main room and have this conversation together?
I think that works
Yeah.
based on, especially the past couple we've done. This is a
Okay.
more of
All right,
a
let's
concur.
just stay here and please speak up, use the chat. I wasn't able to type in the chat, but Wendy and David both have access, so they can help add comments to the stickies if you want to type them in the chat. Otherwise, you can type in your own, you can drag stars, or you can just speak out and one of us will capture what you're saying. So let's start with this first question. What does accountability for this plan mean to you?
It means that I'm following, that us right here are doing the right thing. These people, these groups, RVAgreen 2050. It means that when we do this work is accessible to everybody somehow.
I love that. That sounds very utopian. I love it.
You know me.
I think it means very clear indicators of who is responsible for successes in areas that we need improvement. So I think we have to honestly say to the community, y'all got to do, this is not just the city's responsibility or whatever, you have to, dear community, you have to be better at XYZ. Dear mayor, you've got a lot more money. Dear Department of Public Works, you've got to do XYZ, because here's the indication that you are successful, or here's the indication that there are still challenges.
What sort of accountability do we have at the city big level? Like, can we write this into a city ordinance? Or, I mean, I guess is this going to be as big as the city master plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so by achieving these goals and the indicators, I mean, are there ways that, new administrations could just brush that aside? I'm just wondering if there's any sort of like legal mandate that we could set.
That's good thinking.
Yeah, I keep coming back to that. I mean, it's the stick part of the carrot and the stick, but sometimes that's the most effective way. I know what accountability means to me, but I don't know how we are going to hold folks accountable unless there is some kind of legal mandate that has budgets attached to it, or I don't know how that would.
Meet the group on a web page. Everybody gets 3 sentences. You make room for a web page somewhere. These are the people. Here's their email.
Sitting on the Clean City Commission, I can tell you that quickly becomes very problematic. As much as I hate to say that, yeah, we've actually
the death threats.
We've taken out. We haven't got any death threats. We've actually asked to have our emails taken off and just sent to a link. Like there's one link, and then they will all shoot to each one of us if they're appropriate emails to be shot to us, because sometimes they're not appropriate.
You're right. Did not think of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because it's kind of like, don't shoot the messenger, right?
Well, but it is great. On Nextdoor, that's one of the things that I always mention when someone's talking about, specifically a recycling or a waste issue that they're having in their neighborhood, and they don't know how to get it fixed. I always offer the fact that I am the 6th District Clean City Commission member, and that they're welcome to contact me. But I've stopped doing it publicly, and I'll just send them a private message about it. I will tell folks about the Clean City Commission, or I will send them, to the city website where they can find that information. And I do like giving people my personal information when they need it, because I do feel like it holds us accountable. It holds me accountable to do my job as a commissioner. But there's a fine line these days, and it's gotten worse over the last few years.
I'm just gonna say this, and it might irk some people, but like Nextdoor, colloquially, is a white-centered app.
Oh, please! You don't even have to like apologize for saying that. It's shocking sometimes.
Okay. So then, who ensures accountability?
So, this goes back to that. We discussed it at the last roundtable meeting. I think we really do need an ongoing commission that looks at all of these things.
Voted on. A commission that is voted on by the community.
What do you mean?
Like the Citizens Review Board for the cops. You know what I mean? Like a very public way. I don't know, like a way to elect a commission. That like a civilian review board.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I think, I mean, at least having a commission where various communities, appoint a representative, or like, they solicit having a representative from various, whether it's just by the districts or whatever it is.
That's how the Clean City Commission operates.
Yeah.
Every district has a citizen volunteer, and then they have someone who's actually been appointed, and that works out really well, because the citizen volunteer sort of balances out sometimes the views of the folks that are appointed, and vice versa. It's a nice check and balance.
Does the Clean City Commission want this responsibility? I mean, I don't mean
I'm not
necessarily
speaking for the Clean City.
Yeah. No, but
I'm
just saying,
I mean, that becomes like a budgetary thing. And the Clean City, we ran into this a couple of years ago when we were asked by a city council person to do what we all thought was a very simple task. It turned into like this almost year-long wrestle with budgets and legalities, and but that's something to discuss with the Clean City Commission, quite frankly. It would give the commission more teeth. But I don't think that's the right way to do it. I think you need a standalone commission that's equity centered, specifically equity centered.
But
Yeah.
yet
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, Clean City, like, things get complicated when Clean City Commission has its focus, and then there's another committee that has a broader focus, and then how do those two work together? But
yeah, I'm not sure that that's really an issue, though, because I'm not sure that that's an issue. I think the Clean City Commission is, from the conversations that we've had, Katrina, you can probably weigh in here. I mean, they're on board with the equity-centered programs, the equity-centered view of this whole thing. And Clean City is really just an advisory board for city council. So it's not something that, it's not a commission that like really makes policy.
Sure. And actually it wouldn't be appropriate. I mean, but having a commission just for RVAgreen 2050 would be something, because that's broader than waste and clean city issues and all that as well. But it'd be great to have buy-in even from, citizens boards like that, and down to the level of neighborhood community associations and what have you.
I like this conversation because there's also the Green City Commission, and they set priorities each year, mayoral priorities related to all of this, but that's much more kind of action oriented, new policies and, trees and buildings and whatever.
How do I get on that?
I think you go to the website, look up Green City Commission.
Yep.
So there are working group members in some of the different groups that sit on it, and Alicia from our office is the mayoral appointee. So,
your city council person might be able to
Yes.
appoint you.
Yep.
Yeah.
So here's my broader.
I have
thought
history
there.
with Reva. Sorry.
But my broader thought from an accountability standpoint is that, yes, there should be some sort of commission or whatever that is, jointly responsible, hopefully with the Office of Sustainability, as the staff, but that they should be reaching out to as many community organizations as possible for buy-in. And then, again, it's going to be, people are going to be able to commit to what they can, but if there's a project in your neighborhood, then you are committing to support that because it's a good thing for your neighborhood. And therefore, very, very simply, it's like, we're going to send information out for the community to participate, when the opportunities come. So it's really just kind of like a commitment, a partner type commitment level that we support the RVAgreen 2050 plan.
And I see accountability as a bigger issue than that, really. I see accountability as how do we hold the policymakers and implementers accountable, as opposed to how do we just get buy-in from the community and make sure that we're doing that. I would like to see that all of these policies and goals have teeth and have, sort of real world consequences when they don't get implemented.
I'm just gonna bring up an abstract idea real quick, and maybe you don't have to use it or whatever, but file it away in your brain. Like nature does everything right, and here we are humans, and we come along and like mess it all up and give things rigid boundaries and stuff. If we were to think of this in the way that like mycelium works, it literally connects everything, the trees itself, the shrubs, the perennials, like the critters, the little critters in the soil, bacteria. It's literally this system of communication. And when something breaks or something is wrong, that mycelia talks to the rest of the community, and via atomic molecular chains of nutrient cycling, to be able to fix that problem. And if we were to think about the problems we're trying to solve in that paradigm, we might come up with ideas, stronger, resilient ideas.
That's so neat. I took a 12-week course on flow leadership, and they started with like 6 hours worth of presentation on biomimicry. Like if we could learn from nature, we would
exactly
be more effective. So I'll go back and look at my notes, but these are a lot of abstract ideas that we've got to put into a methodology,
Well, and along those lines, if you look at other organizations that have kind of tackled huge problems like this, like I'm thinking, as I was listening to Jason, I was thinking about Homeward, which was created, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years ago, as a hub to make sure that all the unhoused and chronically homeless services were not being duplicated and that people weren't just being thrown to the winds. Homeward is the hub to all of those spokes. And when one organization isn't doing what it needs to do because it's not being responsive to the community or because there are new issues that need to be addressed, Homeward's like command center, I guess you would say. And it makes sure that that entire continuum of care is working the way that it should. So having that one central organization that kind of overlooks all of this might, I mean, that sounds like exactly what Jason was talking about.
Yeah, I like that. So Jason's mycelium and Homeward. I like that. Someone was saying that yesterday that, we have all these organizations. I mean, our stakeholder list for creating these working groups, we've got hundreds of people and organizations in Richmond who care about this stuff. I mean, thousands of people. But there's so much, you're either completely tapped out or efforts are so duplicated and siloed that it's like there's no central hub. So I like the way this conversation's going.
And I guess that would mean that oversight committee wouldn't just have citizen volunteers. It would need to have some experts.
Okay, so let's see. Let's make sure we're hitting these questions. How is progress reported and communicated?
Scientists, data collectors, people whose job it is to collect data.
Collecting it is one thing, but reporting it and communicating it is the challenge.
Right. I think about that water report that we get from the city every year, and I open it up and I look at the water report and my eyes just sort of glaze over. There's a lot of important data there. It's not necessarily put into a form that I understand, and I feel like I'm pretty well versed in some of those in that. I mean, I've got a lot of neighbors who never took science classes, basic science classes, and explaining what's in that report to them can be challenging. So we need to find a way to make it accessible. And this goes back to, equity, make it accessible to folks who don't have the tools to parse that information easily.
Hi, Jason.
The weather report. You find a way to slap a couple extra data points on weather reports, and all of a sudden it like creates the structure in everyone's brain to pay attention to that data point. I know like CBS News that's my chosen jam, but like I know that they have Climate Watch, and it's a little segment. But if we get what's his name, old I Have a Story over there to do a little piece or have the weather person add this extra data point into the daily report, like this is where the heat islands are and this is how they're doing today. They're this temperature here, but on the whole the city is this temperature. That may be like a little too extreme or whatever, but like why not encourage public data points?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
Jason, I think that's brilliant. I mean, it makes me think of like the, air quality index, that was just something they started showcasing, 20 years ago. And I mean, if we could come up with something that kept us in front of people, the weather is something people look at every single day. And, just from the personalities of the different, of the different networks there, man, they'd all be on board for that.
Mm-hmm. Virginia this morning generally has like an alcohol heavy cooking section. Why not have like a scary data point climate watch section? You know what I'm saying? Or at least like community leaders doing a climate thing. I see no reason why they couldn't cut out 5 minutes of, drinking and cooking ribs to like talk about a person doing the work locally. I mean, I can call them up about that. They know me.
But, and kind of back to even what Jeannie was saying too, whether it's daily or whatever, but just being able to show clear indicators of progress, that boils down to like, okay, it's 10 areas and here's how RVAgreen 2050 is doing. And, you can break it down after that, but down to the Joe citizen that just, some level of awareness moving forward. But then I think also this commission or whatever, we've talked about what are the indicators going to be and all that, but that's kind of like just input from all of us. But I think those things are going to evolve. I think when there are going to be annual reports that come out, we're going to be like, yeah, but you guys didn't do a good job of reporting this. I mean, what about this data? So I think that stuff's going to need to evolve also.
I like it. Okay. And then increasing and streamlining interdepartmental communication and collaboration. I think we did that. Who owns the plan and what does that mean? I think we've hit those. Unless you have any other thoughts you want to add to that. The second question is, how would you ensure equity is centered in implementation of the strategies? We've kind of been having this conversation all at once. So we've talked about a new standalone group to guide implementation. What is their role? I think we talked about that. How can we use existing tools? I like the idea of the weather report.
So the United Way had, when I was on the Homelessness Action Committee for years, when it came time, we funded all the homelessness prevention organizations in the city of Richmond. And one of the ways we did that was twice a year, each one of these nonprofits had to come to us and answer all of these questions. They all had to answer the same question. They had to answer them every year on outcomes, on budget, on issues that they found within their organization. There were very specific markers that they had to give us data on every single year in order for them to continue to be funded. And I think it would be very helpful if each one of these departments had that same tool. They all answer basically the same, the same question, tweaked for their department. They all have to give us the same kind of data. I don't know if that's possible, but if they all have the same tool and they have to use it every year, it becomes just second nature and necessary for those departments to continue to function and get their budgets for them to give us that information.
I like that. Well, this has been a very robust conversation. This is your chance to throw anything else out there you can think of regarding accountability and transparency. All right, well then I think with that, let's go ahead and jump ahead. We are going to be working on content development and drafting this fall. David Sale is finishing up his last semester in grad school, and he's going to be continuing to intern with our office this fall. So that's fantastic because he's been with us all along. So he'll be really pulling the pieces together and helping us to come up with a draft product that we'll present to you in November. And then we'll go through some revisions and get it out for public engagement and council approval. So we need help because we're still a very small office. And on that note, unfortunately, Wendy is moving on. She has sold her house, she dropped her son off at college yesterday, and she is moving away. But I think she still has family in town, so she'll still be visiting. But
far. I'll be in Nelson County, I'll be nearby. So.
Yeah. So her last day with our office is
God.
tomorrow.
Wow.
But yeah, we're gonna miss her. So
Wow.
we'll miss Wendy. I'm glad I have David, and I promise I won't bombard you, David, but I'm I'm glad I still have you. So we need help. We need if you have skills or you know of people who would like to help us in any area of plan development, those financing maps, research, design, editing, translating. If you have other skills you think that would be helpful, we would love to have your assistance. So we have a survey that David will put in the chat. It's a volunteer survey, and feel free to share this. It's just asking for some assistance on continuing to volunteer with us in the coming months. And then we also have the regular feedback survey. We're always looking for your thoughts on how we can continue to evolve and do this better. But I am just so grateful that you guys have been on board with us all year. There's no way we could have done this without you. You've been quite a brain trust, and very, very grateful for all of your sharing your invaluable time. We'll pull together, everything we've done, follow up with an email so everyone can take a look at this and add any other final comments. But otherwise, stay tuned. So with that, I will release you. And if you have anything you want to say or share, please do.
I'm gonna try hard. Get me on board.
What'd you say?
I'm gonna try hard. Get me on board.
All right. Well,
come to my conservation landscaping class next Saturday at Sneed's at noon.
Nice.
Okay.
The city's next e-cycle event is Saturday, September 11th at the Broad Rock Sports Complex. As usual for our e-cycle events, we take paper for shredding. We do electronics recycling. In some cases, there's a small fee. And we also do household hazardous waste recycling. We have a flyer that's on the city website. So if you want to share that information, even though it's on the south, the event is being held on the south side. Of course, it's for all city residents to bring items to be recycled.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
You said there was at Broad Rock what?
Sports Complex.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll share that. Bye, everybody. I'm going back to sleep.
All right. Hope you feel better, Jason. Take care of yourself.
Bye, Jason.
Good luck, Wendy.
All right.
Thank you. Thank all of you for participating in this for us.
That's
Thanks,
wishes,
Wendy.
Wendy.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck.
I think we got some good information there. Now the trick is going through it all. What do we do with it, right?
Let's see. I'm not sure. Oh, let me stop the recording just a moment.